Welcome to Storytimer at Large. Susan K. Hall, Moir dancer. Susan K. Hall was born February 24th, 1947 in Indianapolis, Indiana, to Patricia Joan Christie Hall and Charles K. Hall. Susan grew up in Indiana. After her high school graduation in 1965, it seems she set out for the West Coast. And in her lifetime, she was married twice. Jeffrey Allen Moir was born in Oregon on April 4th, 1947. Susan and he married on May 3rd, 1966. They were living in Seattle at 7327 38th Street Northeast. The homes on that street are mostly very mid-century modern style. They look like they were built in the 50s or 60s, and they're really, it's a pretty street and very well kept still today. Jeffrey and Susan separated in July of 1968 and were divorced on October 31st, 1968 in Reno, Nevada. Reno was known as a place where anyone in the United States could go for a quick divorce. And it still is, I think. But you see in movies from the 60s and 70s people going to Reno to get a divorce. Susan's second husband, Ryan Earl Dancer, was from Salem, Oregon. He was born November 2nd, 1946. Susan and he married in December of 1968 in Eugene, Oregon. He was 22 and an employee of a furniture store. She was 21 and was a store detective at the time of this marriage. I just love that about her. I love that she was a store detective somewhere, obviously probably watching for shoplifters and things like that. But that's interesting to me. Susan and Ryan Earl Dancer separated at some point because she had moved back to Indiana and was living at 4800 North Post Road in Indianapolis in the summer of 1971. She had been working at Range Line Auto Parts in Anderson, Indiana for a few weeks that summer. On June 29th, June 29th, 1971, Susan disappeared. And the circumstances surrounding her disappearance are very suspicious. A man described as her friend and coworker at Range Line Auto Parts, Galen W. Gathers Jr., was the last person to see her alive. They had only worked together for 3 weeks, so they likely weren't acquainted for a long time. I didn't find any evidence that they had known each other before working together. Galen W. Gathers Jr. said that they drove a car from Tom Wood Pontiac, which was located at 3215 East Washington Street, into downtown Indianapolis. Susan was test driving the car and considering buying it. I imagine that she had asked Galen Gathers along because he was a mechanic working for Rangeline Auto Parts, and she probably felt like he would know about cars and he could tell her if it was a good car or not. So that makes sense that she would take him along on this test drive. He said she came back to the car with $5,000 in cash, but he did not know where she got it. Let's assume that she withdrew it from the bank, since that makes the most sense. I can't imagine where else she would have gotten it. I imagine Susan asked Galen W. Gathers, of course, to go along on that test drive because he knew about cars. She probably asked him a day or two before. She likely outlined the plan to him so that that they would test drive the car and go to the bank for the cash if she decided she wanted it. So he very likely would have had time to think about this itinerary beforehand. If he did kill Susan, then this was premeditated. Galen W. Gathers Jr. said that when they were downtown, she returned to the car with the money. He said they then went their separate ways for a while at that point. She went shopping, he said. He went to the bar for a few beers. This this makes no sense to me at all. Why in the world? You're on a test drive. You need to get that car back to the dealership, and you need to pay for it. She was buying a car. I can't see her going shopping and him going to sit for a few beers. He said he came back to the parking lot and waited for Susan, but she never showed up. He drove around a bit and then gave up and took the car back to Tom Wood Pontiac on East Washington Street. He told the dealership that Susan would be back to buy it the following day. Does wasting all that time downtown seem logical when a person is test driving a car? Like I said, it doesn't seem logical to me. Seems to me like she would have wanted to go straight back to the dealership and buy the car. Galen said that after he dropped the car off at Tom Wood Pontiac, that he then drove his car back to home, I guess. He says he drove Susan's 4-year-old daughter to Susan's relative's home and then left. It's not clear if the 4-year-old girl was with Susan and Galen W. Gathers during the test drive and the trip downtown. That's something I'd like to know more about. Could Susan's daughter have witnessed her murder? I also wondered if Galen Gathers had left Susan's 4-year-old daughter with his wife and children. It's possible that that's an arrangement that they made, that, come to my house, you can leave your daughter there, she can play with my kids, and my wife will watch her, and then we'll go drive, go get this car, do the test drive, and your daughter will be there the whole time, so she won't be in the way and things like that. I don't know. It's not clear where Susan's 4-year-old daughter was, but Galen said he drove her to Susan's relative's home and then left. Susan's relatives called the police the next day. Searches were launched. People were questioned. Months went by and there was no sign of Susan. She had been in possession of $5,000 in cash. Was she robbed? Did she run away? Was Galen W. Gathers Jr. to blame? He was the last person to see her alive, after all. 3 boys were hunting rabbits on December 11, 1971. They stumbled upon Susan's body in the woods near Greenfield, Indiana, in Hancock County. The location is described as 3 miles south of Fortville. Her death certificate says that the site was in a field on County Road 50 west north of County Road 600 north. On my blog post, if you click on the link, you'll be able to see photos of the maps and photos of the area where her body was found on taken from Google Earth, so you can get an idea of the lay of the land. But it's farmland, it's flat, wooded here and there, but the actual spot where her body was found was a field. Since she disappeared in the summer, and if it would have been all corn, probably really tall corn. Susan had been shot in the head. An autopsy would later reveal that she had been shot 3 times in the head and 6 times in the body. Sergeant Irwin R. Wilkerson of the City Police Missing Persons Division said he thought the angle of the gunshot wounds to the head suggested to him that Susan was on her knees when she was killed. It seemed like an execution-style killing to him. All 9 of the bullets were .32 caliber. It seems like this killer really wanted to make sure she was dead. Didn't want her talking and identifying him. Susan's death certificate indicates that she was still married to Ryan Dancer at the time of her death. The newspapers call her a divorcee. Perhaps she and Ryan Dancer had separated, but were not yet divorced. It seems so. In those days, newspapers were very big into talking about a woman's marital status. Was she single? Was she married? Was she divorced? If she was divorced, then they would, slant the article a certain way so that she looked slutty and loose. Yeah, all conjecture, all ridiculous, all horrible, all victim blaming. Susan's cousin, Virginia Lance, was the person who reported information for Susan's death certificate. I imagine if Ryan Dancer had lived in Indianapolis with Susan, he would have been that source of information, but he was, of course, still on the West Coast. In the newspapers, it was reported that Susan's employer was thinking of firing her at Rangeline Auto. Newspapers at that time, like I said, were all about victim blaming. They said that the sheriff's office was investigating Susan about a drug case. The newspaper reported that the sheriff asked Rangeline Auto not to fire her so they could keep an eye on her whereabouts. It seems that Rangeline Auto Parts did indeed let her go, however. Now keep in mind, Galen W. Gathers Jr. also worked at Rangeline Auto Parts. He was 22 at this time of Susan's disappearance. He was a married man of 2 years at the time. He had grown up in Greenfield, Indiana, and worked in Anderson at Rangeline Auto Parts for several years. That's why the spot that Susan's remains were found raises questions. She was found not far from Galen W. Gather Jr.'s hometown of Greenfield. The likelihood that she was abducted by a stranger and taken to that spot out of every other place in Indiana seems very low to me. Galen W. Gathers Jr. was investigated for the murder of Susan K. Dancer. His story about her not returning to the car that she was intending to buy that day seemed suspicious to investigators as well. Gathers also owned a .32 caliber handgun. I did not find any reporting of ballistics testing having taken place. Galen Gathers Jr. was given a polygraph test, but the results were not made public. It seems he was never charged in Susan's murder. In July of 1971, Galen Gathers Jr. took out a room in an Anderson, Indiana motel. So she's killed she disappears in June. In July, he's taken out a room in a motel. What's the reason that he had for staying in a motel? He ran up a bill of $80. That was big money in 1971. He must have stayed several days, perhaps even a week, considering what a motel room cost in 1971. He left without paying his bill and was then charged in a criminal court with fraud. He later paid the bill in full and got out of any serious charges. What prompted that stay at the motel? I mean, Anderson is near where he lives, where he lived at the time and where he worked. It's not like it's a vacation where he's going up to Lake Michigan for a weekend or something. About the same time that Susan's remains were discovered in December 1971, a triple murder occurred that looked like a mafia-style execution. The 3 murder victims were businessmen, and I imagine that their murders then took top priority. They had more status than Susan. Galen W. Gathers Jr. was in trouble with the law somewhat in 1972. In January, he was driving while intoxicated and on a suspended license. On February 1st, he was arrested for public intoxication. He served 60 days at the county farm and paid fines and court costs totaling $38 on charges of reckless driving, driving on a suspended license, and possession of dangerous drugs. Remember that part earlier about the drugs that were found at Rangeline Auto, and Susan was suspected of being a part of that, and Susan was fired. What if the drugs were actually Galen W. Gathers Jr.'s drugs, and he, his employer found them, and he blamed the new girl that had only worked there a few weeks. Why, she was from way out west. I have a feeling that's probably what happened. That's just me, though. In 1975, Galen Gathers Jr. ignored the flashing lights at an Anderson, Indiana railroad crossing. He drove his car into the path of a Pennsylvania Central train. It was almost 1 a.m. on Monday, August 11, 1975. He died of his severe head injuries about a month later on September 10, 1975. He was then buried in his hometown of Greenfield, Indiana, at Park Cemetery. It seems that Galen W. Gathers Jr. was no longer married at the time of his death. He and his wife had had children before, though, so he did have 2 daughters when he passed away. Susan K. Dancer was buried in Junction City in Lane County, Oregon. It seems that her husband, Ryan Dancer, claimed her body and brought her back to his home state for burial. Her first husband, Jeffrey Allen Moir, might also have been involved in her final arrangements. Both men were from Eugene, Oregon, from that area. Junction City, where she's buried, is about 25 minutes north of Eugene. We can only hope that Susan rests there in peace. Susan K. Dancer's case is still considered unsolved. I think I would just consider it unprosecuted, but again, that's just me. Susan deserved so much better in life. She deserved to be able to live her life and raise her daughter and enjoy all of the things that raising a child means. You know, the first day of kindergarten, the first day of first grade, dance recitals and sporting events and all of the things you miss. Susan deserved to be there for that. She deserves to still be here today. Rest in peace, Susan.